60 seconds, 60 seconds. So as you were going around the room and you're having people sign on your paper, were there things that you saw in other people's papers and you were like, man, why didn't I think about that? I should have wrote that down. What were some of those things? Music, money, just traveling, friends, faith, empathy, love. There was one more. Family, freedom. Good. Community. Good. I am assuming that everyone was at least able to find one person to sign on their paper. Is that a safe assumption? All right, great. As you were also walking around, were there things that were more difficult to find someone to sign on, or you actually didn't find anyone to sign on? What was one of those things? What was that? Problem solving. Please raise your hand if problem solving is of value to you, even if you didn't write it down in your paper. All right, cool. I heard motorcycle. And let's say recreational vehicles. If those things are important to you, even if you didn't write them down in your paper, please raise your hand. Recreational vehicles of any sort. All right, cool. One more thing. Trust. If trust is of value to you, even if you didn't write it on your paper, please raise your hand. All right, great. Let's do one more. Yes. A second chance. An opportunity for a second chance, if that's important to you, even if sometimes you don't deserve it, please raise your hand if you get that second chance. All right, great. So what do you think is what's the point of me doing this exercise at this particular point in this particular workshop?
We're all different.
That we're all different. But we also have what? We are also very similar. What I'd like for you to write down is, write this down somewhere on your paper. I want you to write down this definition of diversity. That it is our commonalities and our differences that we recognize and honor. It is both. I know that I've attended a number of sessions where they focus on one of those aspects, but not very often have they focused on both at the same time. And what I would suggest to you is that we are very much alike, but there are some differences. But it's in both of those that we honor each other, that we come to meet each other. And it's very interesting because if we don't recognize that, then we succumb to the illusion, the obstacle illusion, that in fact our differences are so vast that we are not alike. I want to hip you to something. I want to just give you something. And for many of you, this may be a surprise. But I was not born black. I know some people are like, is that a reverse Michael Jackson thing? Like, what's going on with the brother? No, I'm fine, right? So in 1970, October 30th, my mother goes into labor and she delivers and she's... And my dad is giving her ice chips and all this stuff. And she's right. And so they deliver the baby. The doctor does something very archaic for the time. He turns me upside down and he slaps me. And I do what any self-respecting young man would do. I slap the doctor back. That's actually an old Richard Pryor joke and the only one I can tell. So the doctor hands me off to my mother. My mother puts me on the scale. She hands me to my mother. My mother hands me to the nurse. The nurse puts me on the scale. She takes how long I am. She does the weird thing with your foot. She takes my foot and puts it on a stamp pad and puts it on the paper. I've never been asked for my foot ID in my life. So I don't know why they do that, right? Can you imagine going to the bank? Can I see your ID? Yes. You know, so I've never been asked for that, right? But then the nurse comes to the part of the sheet that changes my life forever. And is the category of race. And in 1970 in Dayton, Ohio, there were 3 categories of race. Black, white, and other. So the woman looks at my family. She looks at me, she looks at her list, she looks at me, she looks at my family, she looks at her list, and she makes a decision. What decision do you think she makes? Black. But what intrigued me about that process was this question. What was I before she checked the box? I was born human, but America made me black. If I was in Haiti, I would be Haitian. If I was in the Dominican Republic, same island, different side, I would be Dominican. If I was in South Africa, I wouldn't be black, I'd be colored. Again, my question, my quandary isn't just about me, but about you. Who were you before you were put into a box? What are you now that you're in that box? And what do you do with the box you're in? And so when we think about our commonalities and differences, we can't succumb to those obstacle illusions. And I suggest to you that race is one of those obstacle illusions. Gender roles in Western society are part of those obstacle illusions. Artificial barriers to authentic human relationships. So So what are some truths about humans? Let's go back to your handout. Let's look at number one. There are 4 truths about human beings that I'd like to have us point out or think about. One is that human beings can learn, change, and grow. I am not today who I was at 17. Thank God. No, we can learn, we can change, and we can grow. Has anyone ever planted seeds? Raise your hand if you've ever planted seeds. All right. Once you plant a seed, do you go back and check on it every 15 minutes? No. Why? Because it needs time to grow, to work the process, to go through its natural progression. Oftentimes, when we look at human beings, we don't take that into account as we relate to them. That people can learn, change, and grow. But the biggest resource they need is time. I would imagine that many of our ancestors who came to live in this part of the country or in the United States, who came from other places, did not speak English as their primary language. Did not live in communities where English was the dominant language. Did not operate, cook food, label with English words. But over time, learned how to do those things. So people can learn, change, and grow, given time. Secondly, is that people do what they think works even when what? Even when it doesn't work. Have you ever heard someone say, I work best under pressure? You ever heard someone, right? So they spend all of their last few hours cramming for that test, writing that paper at the midnight hour, at the 13th hour, just to get it in. Why would they do something like that? Causing themselves tons of stress. I was listening to some students studying over here, and they were talking about how they had their stress-relieving aerosols, or I don't know what they call that, aromatherapy stuff, right? They're like, I put that plug in because I need to relax because I have this test this morning. Why do you think they go through all of those things? Because what? Because they think they work. But why do they think that it works? Yes.
Because they believe it.
Because they believe it. But why do they believe it? They were taught it, they were told it, and they know that that works. When you see a baby falling out at the grocery store, you ever seen that? Or the big box store, and particularly the candy aisle or the toy aisle, and the kid is just falling out? Right? You ever seen that? Anybody? No? Okay. Do you think that's the kid's first time? When you see them, do you think that's their first time falling out? Probably not. Why? Because it worked before. And so people do what they think works, even when it doesn't, because they at least saw success once. And so they keep going back to that. They keep going back to that. Next is that all human behavior is goal-directed, and we'll talk about that goal in just a second. But that's important for us to realize that even though people are procrastinating, they believe that that is effective in helping them to reach their goal. And we'll talk about those goals in just a second. And then lastly, this idea of an attitude. What is an attitude? How have attitudes been described to you? How many of you have attitudes right now? What's an attitude? It's what? It's a behavior or something that's typically seen as being bad. It's what? Or it's a good behavior. Attitude. Yes.
You can have an attitude towards anything. It's your thoughts and views on it.
It's your thoughts and views on it, right? Yes.
How you present yourself?
How you present yourself. You guys have great answers. Oh, yes.
How do you approach a given situation?
How do you approach a given situation? Wonderful answers. And those answers would have been inadequate for my parents. My parents went to a place called Old School. I don't know if it, and I would often ask them, where is your diploma from Old School? Right? What's the address of Old School? But they would always say that we're Old School. And so my parents wanted to raise us differently than how they were raised. And so they would use psychology, they would use all sorts of stuff. And when that did not work, they went to what they knew, which was yelling and screaming. Right? And so we would make my parents we would make them unraveled in a number of different ways. And my parents would say goofy stuff to us. And one of the things that my mother would say when she got flustered, she'd say, "Boy, go to your room till you learn how to act." So I go to my room, I get my act together, I step out in the hallway, and I'd say, "To be or not to be." I spent a lot of time in my room. So my dad was also my pastor. And so I grew up in the church. I'm a preacher's kid. You might hear a little bit of that, so it's not my fault. All right. So Friday night, I asked my dad for the car. First of all, on Sunday, we went to church all day. From 7:30 a.m. to 11:30 p.m. We stop at 3 o'clock for chicken, not because we're black, but because chicken is delicious. So church all day on Sunday. So Friday night, I asked my dad for the car. My dad loves me. What does he say? He says, yes, he loves me. So I get in the car I go pick up my friends. We go cruising for girls. I don't know what would have happened had we found girls. But we come home from, I come home with, filled the car up with gas, come home early before my curfew, toss my dad the keys. He says I have what kind of an attitude? Before curfew, car's full of gas. Yeah, he would say I had a good attitude, right? So Friday night, my dad and I are cool. We're good. Sunday, my best friend Dexter calls me at noon and says, "Andre, can you pick me up for the movies?" What do I know about Sunday? Church all day. But I'm 17. I'm invincible. And Jesus is my friend too. So I go up to my dad and I say, "Dad, can I borrow the car?" What does he say? Not only does he say no, but he gives me the ultimate consequence in my house, which was going to hell. If you didn't do the dishes, you're going to hell. You didn't cut the grass, you're going to hell. And either you could go to hell on your own, or my dad would show you the way. As a result of that, what was my attitude towards my father? I had a negative or a bad attitude. Friday we were cool. Sunday I have an attitude. What is it that drives an attitude?
Goals.
Your goals. Your goals. So if you see a coworker, you see a student, you see a community member who has a grievance, who has a bad attitude, what is that attitude telling you about their goals? They're not met. So as helpers, as leaders, as guides, if we want to help people have good attitudes, then we have to help them reach their goals. And in some cases, they may have a goal that we can't help them with, or that's not good for them. Then what is our job in terms of helping them with goal accomplishment? Helping them to redirect their goals, right? Because I don't want people's failures or successes tied directly to me. Because they'll always need me to help them. I want them to be reflective of their own capability to help themselves. And so what are the things? What are these goals that we're driving people towards? People are always looking for these three things: significance, belonging, and safety. Significance says, I am a person with purpose and power. I was born for a reason, and I can do something. Martin Luther King said it best. Not everybody can do everything, but everybody can do something. So what can you do? What is your significance? What is your contribution? And then secondly, is this idea of belonging. We also have a yearning to be in relationships with people who understand our significance or our purpose. I would suggest that the clubs you belong to, the community events that you engage in, the friends that you have, understand your purpose and your power oftentimes when your family doesn't. What is your connection? And then lastly is this idea of safety. We want to be physically, emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually safe to be in relationships with people who understand our purpose. So we're constantly looking for safety, significance, and belonging. Why do people go through these doors, through the admissions process, where you have to expose all of your stuff, your finances, your goals, your dreams? Why would people go through that? Because they actually believe, and we've told them, that we can give them access to their humanity, which I think is exemplified by significance, belonging, and safety. And so we're all looking for those things. All right? Cool. So let's go to just briefly look at number 2. I think this is an extremely important part as to even why we get to have conversations about diversity, about equity, about inclusion. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, and promote the securing of blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Declaration of Independence, paragraph 2. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I love hearing those words. Anybody else? Does your heart get warm and fuzzy when you hear those words? Anybody else? Is it just me? You love hearing those words. But why do we have to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion if those words are so powerful? Because we haven't always lived up to the best of our intentions. As these great words are being penned in 1776, what are we simultaneously doing? While we're fighting and living for freedom and liberty, what are we simultaneously doing? The transatlantic slave trade, that economic system called slavery is going on. What else is happening? So we just ended the Revolutionary War. This is what I think is very interesting. So there's a group of people called the Tea Party. And I find them interesting because they're against taxes. And they use something that actually started the Revolutionary War as their point of, their jump-off point, their launching point, which was the Boston Tea Party. Are people familiar with the Boston Tea Party? So the Boston Tea Party, for those who aren't familiar, was this event where King George was taxing the colonists more than they felt was reasonable or necessary, blah, blah, blah. So what they did was they dressed up as these great patriots, dressed up like Native Americans, these great patriots dressed up like Native Americans and spilled all this tea into the harbor as a protest to King George, the Boston Tea Party. Great patriots. Why did they dress up as Native Americans? To cover their own identity, these great patriots. Because what was also happening while we're doing this transatlantic slave trade, what else is happening? Massacre of Native Americans. Yeah. So we live in a land of contradiction, a land of duality, and we have to tell the truth about that duality. Because if we only tell one side of the story, then when the other side comes up, we're surprised. We're surprised. as far as I'm concerned, is one of the greatest nations that has ever been on the face of the planet. And because of that, and I love her, I'm going to hold her accountable to what she says about all of us. So that's important stuff. So let's go open up your handout. What is the most valuable non-renewable resource on the planet? Water. What's the most valuable non-renewable resource on the planet? You. There will never be another you. Even your clone won't be you. A lot of you are probably happy about that in terms of looking at me, right? We're like, we do not want another one of this dude, right? No, there will never be another one of you. And so one of the things that we have to recognize is how powerful and how brilliant and how beautiful we all are. So when I think about the transatlantic slave trade, the thing that I thought was very interesting about that is they understood something that we're just now coming to terms to understand the dynamism or how dynamic that finding was. Which is that the human soul is basically made up of two parts. I told you I taught middle school, so this was my best way to talk about the human soul to my middle schoolers. That it is the body and it is the soul. That is the body and the spirit. Now, where those things come from and where they go, I don't know. But I do know that comprises the human soul. And so the human soul is marked by our authentic relationships with one another, our service to one another, our appreciation to one another. And I would submit to you that the transatlantic slave trade was masterful in what it did because it wanted to harness the power of the human soul. How many chromosomes are there in the human body? How many chromosomes we have? I know I got some biologists in here, right? Chromosomes. Is it 46? Is 2 pairs of 24? Is that right? So it's 23 pairs. All right. So 23 pairs. So give or take a pair, am I still human? Yes, I am. Give or take a pair, I'm still human. Now, give or take, 6 pairs, I'm an X-Man. So I'm always human, I'm born human. But the transatlantic slave trade was interesting because it transformed humans. So I remember early, I watched Roots, and apparently they made a remake. It was so powerful for me, I only had to see it once. Right? And my parents did this thing that, they like to protect themselves when they were around us children. And so we were watching this part of Roots, and to protect themselves, my parents would tell us to cover our eyes. Because there wasn't, you couldn't fast forward, there wasn't, TiVo or whatever. So they'd say, cover your eyes. And so to help my parents out, when it got to the risky parts, we'd cover our eyes like this. Just to protect my parents, right? And so there was this early episode where they're conditioning this young man for the economic system of slavery. And so they asked this young man a question, and they say, "What is your name?" And so the young man is in the stirrups, and he says proudly, "My name is Kunta Kinte." And the person responds with a lash. And he says, "No, your name is Toby." And so this process continues for a better part of the afternoon, and the crowd that is witnessing this is very concerned. And finally, towards the end of both people being at the end of exhaustion, the man finally hits the young man and says, "Young man, what is your name?" And he says, "My name is Toby." In that process, what happened? He transformed a human being into a thing. I like to say that the economic system of slavery, because I believe that those people were never slaves, they were survivors in that economic system. But what lashed actions are you taking by commercials that transform you from a human being into a thing? Anyone ever seen a commercial that actually makes you feel good about being a human being? They're very far and in between. What are most commercials telling you about yourself? How inadequate you are, how horrible you are. And it's so funny, certain programs, coming to your life. You have to know that this is the worst thing that's ever happened to human beings ever. It is the trumped up nation. It's the Obama nation. It is just a horrible thing. And then they cut to commercial. Are you suffering from anxiety? And the side effects are your eyes will bleed, your arm will fall off. Right? What are they trying to do? They are trying to transform us from human beings into things. So what does it mean to be a human being? I would suggest to you that I learned this from Tom Hanks, of all people. Tom Hanks. Anyone seen that movie where he's stranded? What is that? Castaway? Right? So what does it mean to be a human being? I would suggest to you that humanity is not an isolated, solitary existence. To be fully human means to be in relationships with other human beings. Because what did Tom Hanks do after a certain period of time? He started kind of losing a grasp on reality until he created who? Wilson! Right? If you have any heart at all, that scene will make you cry. Right? Did I give it away? I didn't give the movie away. Right? People have seen it already. Right? So Wilson. Right? So he makes this inanimate object a person he can have relationship with, because we yearn to be in relationships with folks. And we yearn to be in relationships with them and to be of service to them, even sometimes when it's not advantageous for us. It's not advantageous for us. So humanity is this relational act. And there are barriers to our humanity. There are artificial, obstacle illusions to our humanity. One is this idea of historical trauma. All those things that happened before we showed up on the scene that keep happening. Historical trauma is a barrier to our humanity. Limits us, makes us think we can only go and be in certain places. Institutional racism is a barrier to our humanity. I would submit to you that any institution created before 1863 is a racist institution. Why? 1863 is when the Emancipation Proclamation was signed. I would also submit that it may be a possibility that any institution created before 1964 is also a racist institution, which is where the laws were carried out, allowing the 13th and 14th Amendment to actually be manifest in the lives of the people. So the 13th and 14th Amendments are extremely important, but didn't get actualized in the majority of the population until 1964, the Civil Rights Act. We'll talk about that. The other thing is, the last two barriers to our humanity are poverty. And why is poverty a barrier to our humanity? Why might it be considered a barrier to our humanity? Because it's what? It suppresses us. We're always trying to survive. The interesting thing about poverty is we always talk about the people, but we never talk about the system that the people are surviving in. It's always individuals' either fault or responsibility, when in fact we have systems that are designed to keep certain people poor. Anyone ever bounced a check? Many of you probably don't write checks anymore, right? But for those of us who used to write checks, what is the penalty for bouncing a check? An overdraft fee. And what is that overdraft fee supposed to do? It's supposed to encourage you or deter you from bouncing another check. But what does that do for poor people? It creates this spiral that is not an encouragement when we start thinking about different things. I used to be against check cashing places. I actually like check cashing places now that I know what they offer. I love check cashing places because all the fees are right up on the kiosk. You know what you're getting into. But with some of these banks with free checking and all this other free stuff, all these hidden fees, you don't know what you're getting into. And so sometimes we blame poor people instead of looking at the systems that are creating them poor, because we actually believe that people can be poor. We actually believe that their chromosomes decrease because of the situations that they're in. That there are some people who are less than human because of their economic or their social status. And so we blame them. The last thing that is a barrier to our humanity is this idea of whiteness. I think whiteness is problematic. How many people would consider themselves white? Raise your hand if you consider yourself white. All right, cool. Where do white people come from? And don't say Nina. Where do white people come from? Germany? Europe? I think that's interesting. I think this idea, this concept of whiteness is interesting because white people come from all over. So what is it that makes them united? It is whiteness. And how does whiteness work? Whiteness works like this. From the studies that I've done and the interactions that I've had with white people, because I've talked to white people and they tell me these things about whiteness. That whiteness is the assumption that all white people are created equal. When in fact, when you talk to white people, they will tell you that that is not the case. What do white people call white people who don't measure to the level of sophistication that most white people think they should? Trailer trash, white trash, disposable people, solo cup people. Right? Redneck, I think that's another red, or Hoosier, right? Oh, is that a college? Okay, okay. Whiteness. White people come from someplace. They are not a color. They're not a thing. And I would say the same thing about black folks. I'd say the same thing about Latinx folks. When we understand where we come from, when we understand the difference between a Native American and a Southeast Asian, when we understand the difference between a Hmong person and a Korean person, we're able to get to that level of distinction, then we're actually able to see human beings and not things. So let's keep going. I got a little bit of time to get through a lot of stuff. So let's go to letter C. I want to go straight to letter C, and I want to know, what is it that was talked about or were you exposed to as you were growing up? And there are some specific ways that I want you to address this piece of information. What I want you to do is I want you to put a plus where you learned something positive or something positive was said about the groups across the top from the groups on the left. All right? I want you to put a minus in the box where there were things that were negative that were said about the groups across the top from the groups on the side. And I want you to put a 0 where there was never anything that you talked about or no one ever said anything about those groups. All right? So the groups across the top are African Americans, European Americans, Latina Americans, Asian Americans, disabled Americans, and Native Americans. And what did your parents and family teach you or say about those groups? What did your friends say about those groups? What did school or workplace teach you about those groups? What did TV, movie, and media suggest about those groups? And finally, from your personal experience, what did you gain about those groups? All right? Pluses, minuses, and zeros. You can have pluses and minuses in the same box, but the size of your plus and the size of your minus will dictate how much you learn. All right? So a big plus means lots of positives. A little negative means a little bit of negative. All right? And I'll give you about 3 minutes to do that.